Hello, everyone. It's Adam Caplan here with the great Greg Cosell. We're here for the Eagles pregame show. It's Rams, it's Eagles for the second time in 2 years. They're playing at SoFi. So, Greg, it's Greg Cosell, by the way, from NFL Films, and Greg, obviously, from the NFL Matchup Show, which we love. In fact, Greg, I love when you snuck this in. I think you did. It was last week or the week before, about that young and talented Rams team, which we're going to talk about. So,
Yeah.
let's get started here, Greg. It's funny what a difference a year makes because Eagles won that unbelievable run. After 10 games, they were 9-1. It looked great. They beat the Chiefs on that Monday night. Then the next week, when it rained, the crazy game. It was over 70 points scored. Somehow the Eagles won that game. But you got that sense, Greg, that something was amiss. Something was wrong. Maybe the chemistry was not great. Flip it to this year. They're 8-2. The chemistry seems better. Just from an overall standpoint, what looks good to you for right now for this football team on tape?
Well, I think there's a real substance to the way in which they play. Now, again, things can change, as you know, Adam, in this league. I mean, they could go out to play the Rams and they could lose, and then maybe next week we're having a different conversation. But I would say overall, the way in which they're playing, strong O-line, run-based, physicality, a quarterback that doesn't turn it over, a defense that's improving each and every week, and getting really, really good play out of young players. That's a solid way to play. Now, some might say, "Hey, Let's see what happens if they get into a shootout." Hey,
Sure.
you know this league. You can't predict that stuff. But I think the way that they're structured and the manner in which they're playing is solid football.
So in your tape study, and the Eagles have the 6-game winning streak. We know you don't rank anything, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Just from your two eyes, right? From tape study, do they look like one of the best defenses in football
Uh,
over that time? Over the
yes.
time.
I would say yes in terms of the way in which they execute what they're being asked to execute. I mean,
Yeah.
do they have the best pass rusher in the league? No. Are they dominant at any one position where you go, oh my God, those guys are just great players, with the possible exception of Jalen Carter when he plays the way his physical traits allow. But I would say in terms of the way in which they execute that quarters-based scheme and all the subtleties and nuances that go with it, I think they're playing at a really high level.
All right, Greg. So let's get started. You just mentioned the defense, which has played really well. In fact, I remember when you said we asked you about Zach Bond on the Inside the Tape show, which we do with you every week. You said a couple weeks ago that Zach Bond is borderline dominant. Is he still? Does he still look really good to you?
Oh yeah. I mean, I thought Washington, there were a couple of plays where they tried to put him in conflict and succeeded, but that's going to happen with anybody for the most part, because you can do that to players that have both a run and a pass responsibility on given plays. But I would say for the most part, he's played at a really high level. I think Dean has improved. One thing to keep in mind with a Vic Fangio defense is they ask their linebackers to do much more in pass coverage in their zone principles than a lot of teams do. And if people may think back, and I can't remember if we showed this play a number of weeks ago, but if people think back to the first play of the game against Jacksonville, where Zach Bond had a drop with tremendous depth because of the nature of the motion and the route concept that the Jaguars ran, plays like that he made, you don't see very often by linebackers. So that's always been the case in the Vic Fangio scheme, that he asks an awful lot of his linebackers in terms of getting depth in pass coverage.
All right, so you mentioned Fangio. It's McVay the play caller versus Fangio the play caller. So this is a great matchup. And
Yeah,
you've always said coaches coach event against coaches.
they do.
So let's take a look at that Rams offense. Now, this is one problem that they have, and I want to get into your tape study in a minute. But they have yet to start their projected 5 starters to begin the season. They started 3 different left tackles, 4 different left guards, 2 centers. Now Kevin Dotson, their right guard, started every game, 3 left tackles. So they've had 13 different players starting their offensive line. Not a recipe for success. I know
No.
they've won. I know they've won 4 out of 5 games, but on tape, what's that Ram offensive line look like to you?
Yeah, it's been up and down, and there have been games where and plays where Stafford's been under clear duress. Um, you probably have followed the injury report in more detail than I have,
Yes.
but over the last number of weeks, they've been starting Bo Limmer at center, a sixth-round pick. They've been starting Justin Dedich at left guard, an undrafted free agent. So I think who will play left tackle this week? Do you know?
Yeah, it should be a Lark Jackson.
Okay, so he's back. Okay,
He's
he's
been,
he's the guy they want to start.
yeah, he's been
Right.
back for a while. And we should mention Rob Havenstein is not expected to play. He's not been cleared from the ankle injury. It's tough. So let me ask you this question.
Well, that'll be Warren McClendon then from Georgia, who was a fifth round pick in 2023, and he'll play right tackle.
In fact, I can't. It's funny you bring him up because I remember we talked about him last year.
Yeah.
It's just funny how that works out. So when you look at this offensive line and Stafford, and he's an older quarterback, how's Stafford moving these days as an older guy? Because you worry about guys that get to their 30s, and we know he's had a number of injuries. How does Stafford look like to you?
Oh, I think he looks fine. I mean, look, there's no one in this league, and I say this honestly, uh, who throws the ball prettier than Matthew Stafford. And he can make every kind of throw. He can throw with pace. He can throw with touch. He can drive the football. He's not just a big arm guy. I mean, he's a really special thrower of the football. He can throw from different arm angles. He was doing that way before Patrick Mahomes, but he was with Detroit, so nobody took notice of it.
Sure.
So he's a special thrower. He can move. Is he a creator? No, but he's also not a statue. So, he's still a very, very good player. It's just, as you said, they've been fighting the O-line, and he is a quarterback that will wait there and to make throws. So sometimes he does get sacked. And that's where I think the Eagles have an advantage in this game. But we can talk more about the specifics. When you talked about McVay versus Fangio, there's certain McVay principles that
Yes.
he runs in his offense that you see every single week.
All right. Speaking of that, you've read my mind. So are they still heavy 11 personnel to you?
Not as much, no.
Oh,
They've
okay.
been a little more in playing with 12 personnel this year. Obviously we know in years past they were one of the heaviest 11 personnel offenses in the league. They're still up there, but that's a relative term. I mean, there were years, Adam, going back a number of years, they were up in the 95% range.
Hmm.
Now through what's their records? They
5-5.
5-5. So through 10 games, they're at about 80%, give or take, in terms of 11 personnel.
So high.
They're closer to 20% in terms of 12, but that's not theoretically, it's practically lower than we've seen through the McVay years, where they were clearly. I mean, there were games in years past where they played out of 11 personnel on every snap.
Do they play any 10 that you see?
Um, I think all season long, if they've played 5 snaps of 10,
Yeah.
that's been a lot. I mean, they don't.
Gotcha.
That's not really part
Yeah.
of what they do.
Gotcha. All right. So the difference between last year's game and this game is pretty simple. Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean on the back end.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Mitchell and DeJean. And DeJean also, how do you see DeJean being a factor in this game? Because it's fascinating to see what Sean McVay will have in store for him. How do you see the matchups in this game?
Well, let's turn it around and talk about what they're going
Okay.
to get from the Rams.
Yep.
What they're going to get from the Rams, and this is part and parcel of McVay's offense. Two things really stand out when you watch the Rams offense. Number one, they're a heavy motion team. They're among the highest percentage use of movement before the snap of the ball, whether it's shifts or motions, of any team in the league. So that must be expected. And number two, the other thing they do is a lot of what we call reduced or cut splits, where the receivers line up tighter to the formation. That doesn't mean they do that on every play, but that's foundationally a part of the Rams offense. Now, one thing about the Eagles and the Vic Fangio scheme, oftentimes you see when teams go in motion, okay, and they're playing against a defense that's a heavy single high safety defense, there has to be very often an adjustment, because it's a change of strength in the offense when a receiver, let's say, crosses the formation. When you're playing a quarter structure, which is the foundation starting point for a Vic Fangio defense, that's a balanced secondary, because you've got two safeties, one on each side, and two corners, one on each side. So each of those guys is responsible for a quarter of the field. It's balanced. So when there is motion, you don't have to start moving people around, because you're balanced. You're already balanced. So again, this is not the first team that's ever going to be in a quarter structure against Sean McVay. So I don't mean to suggest that means it's an easy matchup, but it just means that you don't have to constantly communicate and make adjustments based on strength of an offense.
Speaking of communication, Greg, I'm glad you mentioned that because we've pointed this out when we'd do those shows with you during the week on the Inside the Tape show. The communication with this team, and particularly when you've got the real, Vic comes in his first year, doesn't know these
Sure.
players. Basically, save one coach. It's a brand new defensive staff. It's a bunch of young players. The Eagles have gotten very young on defense, which I think is a good thing. So overall, is the communication to you still been as good as we think it is, or has been?
I think it's getting better and better. I mean, you're seeing a lot of. Don't forget, there's a lot of young players here.
Yeah.
We look at someone like Reed Blankenship, and it feels like he's a veteran. I mean, what's he been in the league 4 or 5 years, Adam? I mean, it's not like he's a 10-year pro.
Hooray! This is his third year.
There you go. So Gardner Johnson's been in the league a little longer, but Zach Bond is I mean, he'd be considered a veteran, but he's not an older player. Nakobe Dean's in his third year, first time playing any meaningful snaps. I mean, he plays most of the snaps every week. Even the D line has a lot of youth to it. We know about Mitchell and DeJean being rookies. So this is a young defense. And from what I'm told by people in the building, a very, very coachable group. And that is critical because look, every defense has nuance and detail and disciplines to it. And coaches will tell you that that's the difference between playing good defense and playing better defense. Because look, every coach coaches cover three, every coach coaches quarters, every coach coaches cover six, cover eight, whatever the principle is. But it's how you play it. And there's variations of each one of these. And it all stems from positioning, leverage. Where do you put your eyes based on receiver splits? But, all those things factor in. So it's all the details that end up making for, average defense versus good defense versus better defense.
Greg, we talk about the Rams offensive line, their injuries, but Kyron Williams is a guy that's so underrated. Very, very productive running back. He's been
Yep.
phenomenal. He's in fact, he a lot of scouts I know are they're going to wind up being wrong on him. In fact, they are wrong. A lot of them didn't think he could be a starting running back, but
I was wrong.
we'll get into that in a second. So let's talk about their scheme because we know they've run a lot of inside and outside. What are they this year schematically? And talk about Kyron Williams. What does his tape look like to you?
Yeah, he's a the way I would basically describe him, and by the way, their scheme is pretty multiple. I mean, with him, they've run a lot more what we call duo, double team blocks. They've run a lot more gap scheme, which people, if they remember McVay in those years when they had Gurley, and for 2 or 3 years when Gurley seemed like the best back in the league and their run game was dominant, that was almost all zone concepts. Now they do much more than just zone. Yeah, as I said, it's gap scheme. You'll see trap, you'll see wham trap. There's more principles, more concepts in what they do. In fact, his 18-yard run last week was wham trap. So I would say with Williams is, and I think Blake Corum, who they drafted, is very much like him in that they don't have special physical and athletic traits, but they know how to run. And I'm trying to think the best way to explain it. In other words, they understand how the blocking schemes work with defensive flow and gap fluidity. Because don't forget, when you line up in the backfield, whether you're as an I-back or in the shotgun or the pistol, whatever it is, you're looking at the defense as a back, and you see how they line up. But that changes once the ball's snapped. So you have to have kind of an innate feel for how gaps change and how the defense flows. I would say Williams has a really good feel for that.
One of the things I really admire about Williams, and it's sort of an adjunct to what you're talking about, is he's so patient.
Yeah.
And he accelerates. He's kind of a smooth runner. I wouldn't call him explosive. But then the other thing is, and you showed us this in our Inside the Tape show with you on Austin Eckler. They got Bond a little bit in coverage last week. What did you discover from that tape study from the Eagles defense versus Austin Eckler last week? What did Washington find against those Eagles linebackers?
Well, I mean, basically, what Washington did, which I don't think the Rams will do, is Washington played a number of snaps out of the pony package, meaning two running backs, not a running back and a fullback. And they did some things with movement and both before the snap and after the snap, the way the backs were aligned. And they just kind of put Bond in conflict as to what he was looking at. Because so much is eye discipline, Adam, as you know. You're trying to get. That's what essentially anything that has a misdirection element is to try to create just that moment of hesitation for a second level defender where he sees something, but it's not really what's happening, or he sees it a little differently than what it really is. So you're trying to create just that moment of hesitation. And you and I both know in the NFL, just a moment of hesitation is often enough for a player to be out of position. So we'll see if the Rams, do those kinds of things. Their motion can often do that depending on how you respond to it. But you will see a lot of motion. I doubt you'll see a pony package. I don't think that's really part of what they do.
And we know the Eagles, they just don't blitz much. In fact, they played almost, you want to talk about coverage-based defense last week.
Yeah.
I mean, they did a great job of it. Is there anything in your tape study over the years? And I also want to talk about that Miami game because Miami did a very good job against the Rams offense. Anything that gives Stafford any problems from your tape study over the years in particular?
Um, I mean, obviously pressure, you can say that about any quarterback, but Stafford's seen a lot. I mean, I could show you play after play if you were sitting with me here where he just recognizes what the defense is doing before the snap of the ball and responds to it and then makes plays. I mean, so I wouldn't say that he gets confused or you give him trouble. I would say the number one thing is to make him feel uncomfortable. I mean, that's really the key is to make him feel uncomfortable in the pocket. Because I'll give you an example. Last week, uh, he had cupped for a 69-yard touchdown. I'm sure you know the play.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, the Patriots went cover zero. He read the pressure, he read the coverage, he knew how it played out. He didn't rush himself. He was comfortable and he hit Cup on the skinny post, and there was no safety in the middle of the field. But I mean, and I remember a play from last year, which I thought was one of the best quarterback plays of last year against the Browns, where he read their coverage and he changed the play at the line of scrimmage and he hit Nakua for maybe a 70-yard touchdown. So he
Hmm.
sees things really, really well, and there's very little that he hasn't seen. So really with him, there's a couple of things. Pressure, number one, and number two, he is a very aggressive thrower of the football. So he can make mistakes, okay? But not because he doesn't see it and doesn't know, but because he's going to try to put the ball in there. And he's always been like that. So every once in a while, he'll make a mistake. Yeah, will he make a bad read once in a while? Of course, every quarterback does. But he is a very, very aggressive thrower.
All right, one more thing. Miami a couple weeks ago, week 10, they did a good job on the road. They held the Rams offense to 15 points. Anything you saw from that tape that gave the Rams offense trouble?
What week was that?
I think it was week 10. It was week 10. I'll double
Because
check it.
I can check. I'll check my notes because
Yeah,
um
that was the Monday night game, November 11th. The Dolphins won 23-15. Stafford did not throw a touchdown. They
right.
turned the ball over twice. They just could not get out of their own way. I remember watching that game thinking, man, they just can't get it done. I know Miami's gotten healthier on defense. I was just
Miami
surprised that
Miami does have a good defense.
they do, and they execute and they shut them down. I was kind of surprised by that.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Uh I'm trying to remember that game well, but I don't. So I can't
Fair
remember
enough.
what Miami specifically did in that game. But Miami does have a good defense.
They do.
And that happens to Stafford every once in a while. That where it just there's pressure. I remember just watching that game on TV, a good amount of it, and I felt like there was a lot of early pressure, and he was uncomfortable. And that's the thing. All Look, he can move, but he's essentially a pocket quarterback. So what happens is if you get guys uncomfortable early, they start to speed up a little bit. And that's really what the goal is when you face Stafford is you've got to speed him up early.
It's funny you say it because he looked frustrated.
Yeah.
They couldn't get anything going. It's exactly what it's funny. You say it and I saw it. It's interesting. So, all right, let's switch the switch here. Let's flip the script, right? Let's Eagles offense versus the Rams defense. Now, so the Rams now have Chris Shula,
Yeah.
38 years old, played at Miami, Ohio with Sean McVay, so they're very close. Now, Raheem Morris was their previous defense coordinator. He's now the head coach of the Falcons. Are there any differences between Shula and Morris in terms of the scheme that you see?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some definite things just in
Yeah.
the way they play. You know, this is a defense now over the last month, and teams, as you know, evolve and progress and change over the course of a season. We know that. So one of the things we've seen over the last month is just a dramatic increase in the amount of snaps of dime, six defensive backs. And I think that is a function of obviously we're not there every day, but they know their personnel. Jalen McCullen, number 39, is a player to watch. He is essentially sort of the what whatever teams name that guy, kind of the money backer, the money safety. He plays predominantly in the box, but not only in the box, he's their sixth defensive back. He's their dime defensive back. And they've played more than 25% dime over the last 4 games. And that's become a foundational personnel package for them. And the other player, speaking of rookies, we talked about the Eagles rookies, Cameron Kitchens from the University of Miami has started to get a lot more time as well, and they play a lot of big nickel. So they play with Quentin Lake and Cam Curl and Cameron Kitchens, and they all can play anywhere. They're all sort of multi-dimensional safeties. And Quentin Lake's a really good player. So he's truly a guy that can play anywhere. So they play with a lot of different personnel packages, and they've got a really good safety group.
Yeah, it's interesting because McCullough last week played 38% of their snaps. But boy, the thing about the Rams is we talked earlier about how young the Eagles defense is. They might actually be younger. They're really young. They're very athletic. Let's talk about let's go front to back. So this Kobe Turner, I don't want to say it came out of nowhere. He had a great rookie season, and then obviously Aaron Donald's retired. What's that front look like to you on tape?
Well, there's multiple fronts. Obviously, there's a base front, there's nickel fronts, there's dime fronts. Let's talk about their pass rush front because
Okay.
that's where I think it really stands out to me on tape. What their pass rush front has developed into is two second-year players and two first-year players, Adam. And I think this front's only going to get better and better and better. So on the edge, you have Byron Young from Tennessee. Okay, he's a second-year player. You've got Verse, the rookie from Florida State. He's a first-year player, a first-round pick, Jared Verse. Inside, you've got Kobe Turner, a second-year player who was a third-round pick a year ago. And then you've got Braden Fisk, a first-year player, a rookie who was a second-round pick. And that's their pass rush front. And it has become really good over the last month. Fisk has been winning one-on-one. Turner has tremendously light feet for his size. Verse is a speed to power guy. There are shots of him. You saw it in college. He's continuing it in the NFL where he just blows up offensive tackles. Now, I'm not suggesting he's going to do that to Lane Johnson or Jordan
Yeah.
Mailata. We don't know. And obviously, Lane Johnson is as good as there is and is a Hall of Fame caliber player. But Verse, that's his game, speed to power. And Byron Young, he's a little different. He's a little more of an athlete. But sort of the wild card in their defense is Michael Heck, number 97. He plays all over. He plays on the ball, off the ball, on the outside, stack, in all their different packages. He's kind of the wild card. He's another guy who, I mean, I think he's an Ivy League guy, isn't he?
Out of Brown, yeah, exactly. I was going. I
Yeah,
was going to
yeah.
go there. It's like Brown. It is so rare from anyone from that school to make it in any sport. What a story that's a great find by Les Snead and
I
their
mean,
personnel
even
group.
other guys who play like Christian Roseboom, he's
Yeah,
from South Dakota State. He plays meaningful snaps and he's a good player.
yeah. That's an excellent job of scouting by the Rams here. So
Les Snead, yeah, does a really good job.
he does now. When you look at this situation here, there's no Devontae Smith. He was ruled out on Friday.
Yeah.
We'll have Jahan Dotson starting. We know Jahan has not put up a lot of numbers. Look, the Eagles don't use the third receiver anyway much. But Jahan Dotson, I know we've talked about him on a show many, many times. The Rams, let's talk about the Rams secondary here for a second.
Sure.
You talked to Cam Curl. We know how much you've liked him in the past. How does he factor in? And how about their cornerback group?
Well, let's go to corner.
Yep.
They just got a few weeks ago back Kello Witherspoon, and he's now playing meaningful snaps. Although they kind of rotate three corners. Darius Williams seems to play the most snaps. But then you got Witherspoon, who also obviously plays. You got Kobe Durant, who plays, and he also moves into the slot. So that's really the three corners who all play meaningful snaps. I think they're beatable corners. When I say beatable, I don't mean that every play you're going to beat them, but I think that you could see AJ Brown. You could see, that those matchups work in favor of AJ Brown. I think Hurts will definitely look to exploit that, maybe right from the start of the game, particularly with Devonta Smith out. I don't think their corners are a weakness in the sense that they can't play and they're bad, but I think they're got that's an area you would look to exploit.
So last year, Greg, in that game on October 8th, Goddard and AJ Brown combined for 244 yards. Goddard at
Right.
117, he had a bunch of plays in space. He had a 49-yarder, the touchdown. And AJ Brown, you mentioned him, huge game, over 21 yards per catch, 6 for 127. So it sounds like this is a defense, really in the secondary. It's okay, but it's one that could be exploited, it sounds like.
Well, they also have changed their safety position because they signed Cam Curl, they
Yep.
drafted Kitchens. They're now playing McCullough, who very often lines up in when they do play man on the tight end when they're in dime. So it's a different. They'll play tight ends differently this year. And again, that's not to say Goddard wouldn't have a good game because obviously with Smith out, and if
Yeah.
they're going to throw the ball, depending on how the game plays out, if Jalen drops back 30, 35 times, he's got to throw it to someone. So, Goddard could get a lot of targets. So I don't want to sit here and say, well, now they can shut down tight ends, but they
Sure.
are better playing tight ends.
It's interesting the personnel differences for the Rams. So last year, Aaron Donald was in the game. They had that kid Jonah Williams who used to play for the Niners and is more of a reserve defensive
Yeah.
lineman. You mentioned Witherspoon. Jordan Fuller is now with the Panthers. Russ East, who's bounced around a little bit. Uh, Byron Young's still there. Ernest Jones is long gone. He's been with two other teams after they left the Rams. So things have changed. But to me, other than Donald, it seems like they've kind of improved the back end. It looks like they're actually kind of better
Well,
at
they've
safety.
actually done a really good job. I mean, look, Donald's a first ballot Hall of Famer, so
Yep.
but still, they've done a nice job up front. Even when they play in their base, they've gotten really good play from the likes of Bobby Brown and Tyler Davis. I mean, these are good players. I mean, I remember I did Tyler Davis coming out of Clemson, okay, and he's a rookie, and again, he was a sixth round pick, and I thought he was better than that. Just like I thought Moro Ojomo with the Eagles was better than a seventh
Mhm.
round pick. And Tyler Davis is playing meaningful snaps in their base defense, and he shows up on tape, as does Bobby Brown. So you can argue, even with Donald gone, Adam, that their D line in all its permutations, base, nickel, dime, has done a really, really good job.
Sounds like they've got a very, in fact, sounds like they're a little bit deeper. Obviously, it's safety, but on their defensive line, other than, as you said, without Donald. This Kobe Turner, let's break him down because
Oh yeah.
one of the things I love about having you on is you get to see every player. And this is one of those players who not a lot of people know about. Rams are not a marquee team, though they're in a big media market, but he was arguably the best rookie defensive player last season. Let's break him down. What does the tape look like to you?
Well, first of all, he's got incredibly light feet for a man that size. And I think that's something you don't see that often with a player of that size. Now, he's not super, when I say that size, it's not like he's 325 pounds. He's probably in the 300-pound range, for a D tackle, which I guess in today's NFL would be considered small. But
Yeah.
he'd be best in kind of a one gap scheme. He's a one gap kind of player. You want him to be a penetrator. He's really quick off the ball. He plays low because he's only about 6'2", and he can burst off the line of scrimmage. He's got pretty active, violent hands. And his, like I said, his foot quickness really, really stands out. And he's able to make up for his lack of what you'd call ideal size for a defensive tackle. Just because he's such a good athlete and he uses his hands really well. I think there's a looseness to his movement for a guy, playing D tackle. So I really, really like the player. And I mean, and again, like I said, this is all based on tape. It's not just because
Sure.
I like the player. It's
Yeah.
all based on tape.
Sure, sure. Saquon Barkley, we got to mention him before we move on here. Barkley and these Eagles offensive line versus the Rams run D. Now, I know they're not the biggest line in the world, but they're super athletic and they are very young. To me, we occasionally see Greg Barkley in the pass game, not a lot. Obviously, they had the big play last week up the middle, which was wide open, but that was a huge play for them.
Yep.
Let's talk about Barkley against this Rams defense. How do you think he could do against this team?
I mean, look, Barkley's sort of the starting point of the Eagles offense,
True.
and I think in some ways they're still struggling to figure out how to start games. I mean, again, I don't know that for a fact. It's just an opinion based on watching
Sure.
their tape.
Yep.
Because we've talked about this both with the Patreon group and when we talk about on Inside the Tape, is that when you feel like you can throw it and run it, it's always easy to say, well, let's do both, but you still have to put together a plan to start a
True.
game with, what do we want to do on first down? Hey, if we get to 2nd and 8, what do we do? If we get to 2nd and 3, what's the play? And I think they're still trying to sort of figure out the best balance between run and pass to start games. But the larger point is that Barkley is the foundation of what they do. It kind of starts with him. And we've discussed this numerous times, Adam, and I know you agree. He's run better this year than we've ever seen him run. He was always explosive. He could always take it to the house on any given play. But this year, he has really run between the tackles and confined space better than he's ever run before. And I know they've worked really hard with him on certain body type things, which I know nothing about, but it's been explained to me by people in the building who know and work with him. And they've just gotten him a little looser, and he just, he's not. Another thing is he's not always looking for the big play. So they've gotten through to him that, you know what, when you hit it up inside, if you can get 7 and it's first down, that's a good run. We'll take it. You don't have to look for 25, you know.
Yeah.
So he's done a really, really good job of running in confined space better than he ever has. And boy, does he look like a really good back.
Yeah. So, Greg, the knock on him was, and I remember when we got notes in free agency, Jeff and I, about okay, why is he making it to free agency? What don't people like about him? We actually, I know we asked you, and you said you saw the same thing about his pass protection was a concern, but as a pure runner, he was second level, didn't see it real well. Sometimes would run into contact, didn't wasn't real
Yep.
instinctive. It's like he's been reborn here under Jamal Singleton. The running backs coach is phenomenal. You just talked about it. I don't want to say he looks like a different back, but he looks just better. He's a smarter runner. He sees it better. He
Yep.
finishes better. And remember, you told us this. This is you were the first person to tell us this. You really weren't sure if they get a big lead, could he be the finisher?
Right.
There was a question. Honestly, I thought that was such a great point you made back in March when we did the show with you. Okay, how does he fit in? What's he going to look like here? And you said, guys, I got to be honest with you. Despite being 235, he doesn't play to that weight.
And now he is.
That's what I wanted to get to. So he does look like a guy could finish to you.
Oh yeah, I mean, there were times with the Giants where they asked him to be a finisher, and they now it's easy to say they didn't have a great O line, but it's funny. Sometimes, and it's true with almost every position, okay? And maybe this is from doing college evaluations for years and years. You have to evaluate the player, okay? Now, sometimes numbers are a function of a lot of other things that go beyond just the individual player, but
Sure.
you have to evaluate the player. And when and again, I'm not the only one who thought this, by the way, because the tape showed you. That's the point. It's the tape. It's
Right.
not an opinion. It's not a take. It's the tape. He did not show the kind of traits, despite his size, of being a strong finisher. He did not. It's funny because we think of Derrick Henry as being so big, but he's really not that much bigger than Barkley, okay? And when you watch Derrick Henry would always be the kind of runner that when it was blocked for 3, you'd look up and all of a sudden it was 2nd and 2, okay? And Barkley was not that kind of runner, but he is this year.
And it's amazing. And obviously, we have to give the Eagles offensive line and Jeff Stoutland, who's the run game designer, credit.
Oh, yeah.
It's
And
phenomenal.
actually, they have an assistant O-line coach too, and I forget his name, and he really should get a lot of credit because I've heard he's very, very involved.
Now, Roy Estevan left a couple years ago to Cleveland.
Yeah, there's another younger kid, and I wish I could remember his name.
I
I
will
feel terrible.
I will find it for you.
Yeah,
I should know this by heart. But
yeah.
we gave Jamal Singleton credit. I mean, he's done a phenomenal job at running back. Now, their assistant offensive line coach. Let's see here. That's a good
If
question.
you said the
You
name,
know who it is? It's Ryan Paganetti's brother, TJ Paganetti, who used to
that's
be.
it.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah,
Chip Kelly brought him and Ryan in back in
yeah.
2013 from Oregon.
He's doing
Okay.
a great job. From what I gather, what
Okay.
he's being asked to do,
Yeah.
doing an unbelievable job. We all know
Yeah.
about Stout. He's one of the best, but
Of
this
course.
kid, from what I gather, is doing a great job.
So TJ's title is run game specialist, assist offensive line. He's also coached defense over the years for the Eagles. That's quite the story. So good shout out there. And I cannot emphasize this enough, man. This coaching staff this year, both sides of the football, Greg,
Yeah.
what a great job they've done. I don't know what else to say. Joe Banner's always harped on this, our friend of the show, former Eagles president. No team could be great without great coaching. No matter what the media thinks, he's so big on coaching, and you know it because the tape confirms it from what you're
Well, and
watching.
also I'm a huge believer in that, just based on my career, who's
Hmm.
taught me so many things about the quarterback position, about
Sure.
other things. I try to learn every year. I mean, as I've told you, I've tried to learn more and more about the details of the Vic Fangio defense, because it's not just, oh, they play quarters. I mean, that's,
Yeah.
it's there's so many little details. Um, in fact, I did a piece on the matchup show this week on showing the Zach Bond play that I mentioned and the Blankenship interception from last week. That's all about the details. And
That's
that
awesome. Oh,
those are
nice.
the things I'm trying to
Nice.
learn more and more, because that's really what it comes down to. Look, I've
Sure.
been very fortunate in my career that I've sat in on meetings at training camp. I've sat in on DB meetings, D coordinator meetings, and it's all details. They don't, no coach sits in a meeting and says, "Hey guys, you know what? Let's just go out and make plays." No coach says that. You know that.
You
It's
mean it's
all
not, hey, you cover him, you cover him. Let's go.
no, no, no. They don't do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. All right, it's time for that point in the show where we got to make our game picks, and we got a
Oh
surprise
boy.
here. All right, so Geoff Mosher, who's on assignment somewhere in the
He's
country.
yes, on assignment. Yes.
Yeah. Jeff has got it. 26-21. The Rams. What is he doing? And
Interesting.
he's got Puka Nacua, who is a beast, by the way. We didn't talk about
And
him
by the
much.
way, he's a
Yeah.
motion guy. He's
Okay.
That's what he does. I mean, literally almost every reception he has this year, he's been in motion.
It's amazing. Yeah. And those tight splits. So he's got it Rams 26-21. I am going Eagles 27-20 over the Rams. And the guy who's been the home wrecker, I think he's number 98. Jalen Carter, I just the Rams have had all these problems with their offensive line. Stafford doesn't move very well. Greg said he's not a statue, but he's also not a great athlete. I see it. Stafford getting after it. And Greg, we'll set it to you last. What do you got?
Yeah, that's the one concern for me in this game, the interior of the O line for the Rams, because of Bo Limmer and Justin Dedich. I mean, uh, that's where I keep going back and forth, because I think that McVay will have some things cooked up, and I think there'll be some plays. But I just think that that's going to be a tough thing to potentially overcome. So I think this is going to be one of those games that could easily go either way. Um,
Mhm.
but I
Totally.
just like the way the Eagles are playing right now. I just like the solidity with which they're playing. Um, and I'm going to pick the Eagles, and I'm going to go 26-23, because I think it's a
Okay.
close ball game. Um, and it's funny because I was going to mention Jalen Carter too, Adam, and I think I'll stay with it, because I think
Sure.
if he has a really big game, which he's obviously capable of, then that's going to be a problem for the Rams.
One more guy I do want to mention before we get out of here. Number 19, Josh Sweat. I was talking to one of the Eagles opponents the other day who said, man, he looks like a different guy from last year to this year.
He does.
Let's talk to you about him. What's he look like to you on
Yeah,
tape?
he looks better this year. I don't know if he's healthier. I don't know, but he looks a little quicker, a little stronger. I didn't think he had a very good year last year. And again, that's all based on tape. I didn't think
Yep.
that because there was a stretch of about 2 years, maybe 3 years, where Josh Sweat, as a both a run player and a pass rusher, was probably a top five D end in the league. And then
Wow.
he
That's big.
seemed to
Okay.
fall off.
Yeah.
And last year he did not have, and I bet he would admit it too if he really was being honest, he did not have a very good season. And this year he looks better. Not quite to the level he was when I thought he was really, really good, but definitely better. But I think one player we didn't mention, and I think he's a key going forward because of,
Yeah.
of, of Bryce Huff being injured, is Nolan Smith. And this is a really good opportunity to see if he can continue to evolve as an edge player.
Because Greg, there are questions. I mean, we've talked about
We've
Nolan
talked
Smith.
about them, and they're legitimate questions
Yeah,
based on
yeah.
tape.
And by the way, so many personnel people that Jeff and I spoke to after the draft just to see how he could fit in. Questions about his size,
Yep.
speed to power, didn't have a lot of bend. There were issues. Now, you've pointed out to us on Inside the Tape, you're starting to see some plays each game where he's getting
Just a
better.
little bit. You're
Yep.
hoping that, a
Yep.
little bit. And I know they're working with him very hard on a number of things,
Mhm.
but I think body type wise, he's never going to be 260, because he's got a
Sure.
waist that's like 31 inches. So, that's not going to change.
One more guy. And this guy, I remember calling you about. I said, Greg, Geoff and I want to talk about a kid nobody's talking about. His name is Jalix Hunt. Well,
Ah,
with Bryce Huff out now on injured reserve with after wrist
another guy
surgery.
that's going to get more time.
Yep. All right. Let's before we get out of here. I know 2 weeks ago he shockingly played all these snaps, even when it mattered when the game was close
Yeah.
against Dallas. Didn't play on defense last week. Just from a little bit that you've seen, and obviously it's more tape study from college. You've spoken very highly of this kid. What are your thoughts on
Well,
him going forward?
just again, it's the traits.
Yep.
He went to a small school, so that's always, I don't want to say a concern, but it just makes you pause because you don't know. But you're dealing with a kid that was a safety in the Ivy League, was moved to basically outside linebacker. He's now 6'3 3/4, 255. He's a tremendous athlete. He's got everything you would look for in an edge player. The question is, and we're not there every day in practice. I wasn't there in training camp. You were. I'm sure he has a ways to go just
He
because of
does.
level of competition, but it's all there in his body. His body is capable of him being a quality pass rusher. I would assume he's going to get snaps on defense this week. Now that he may not get 30 of them, but I would assume he's going to get some snaps on defense this week.
Yeah, he's the fourth edge rusher now, and usually the Eagles have had a four-man rotation more or less. So yeah, he
Yeah.
should. All right, great stuff, my friend. We appreciate it. We'll see you with our Patreon group on Tuesday night. Get those questions ready. We'll do the inside the tape with you on Wednesday. And after this game, it's Mosher's back. It's Geoff and I, and we'll see what happens. We'll review it. We'll get it right to you. For Greg Cosell, I'm Adam Caplan. We'll see you next time.